nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Hello, hello Tanzania. Hello, hello upendo wa kweli. Hello, hello Tanzania.
It is Geneva ISO Secretariat and CPTM Smart Partners Hub that jointly organized, led by ISO, but jointly organized this get-together webinar. And we have the outline of the dynamics of the agenda, which is about 10 minutes, half an hour, and 1 hour. But Daniele will be following my short introduction. I'd like to get over it. Will follow and will tell us a bit more about the rules of the game. So Daniele, you want to say welcome, and then I'll...
Thank you, Michaela. Okay, so welcome again to everybody. Thank you for being with us. This is something we've been discussed for some time with Michaela. It was the idea to open some moments, additional moments of discussion on themes relevant to the issues of standardization in the framework of the Smart Partnership Network. And I'm glad to be here today to open this new form of cooperation.
Well, I mean, from our side, of course, I'm kind of I have a few points about why this is a smart webinar. It's the first one of that kind as far as ISO and CPTM group is concerned, with the help of ISO in Geneva and CPTM Hub, which is more or less the home of smart partners, and in particularly the very active group since 2007 of what we call the Quality and Standards Inclusion Group, and is led by Chief Executive National Bureau of Standards alongside the other strategic initiative in CPTM. And well, so it is smart because we are doing it jointly. It is also smart because probably we are trying to bring in an emphasis of the value of smart partnership practice and smart partnership dialogue within the value of standards, or for the value for standards. So that is your role in this webinar that we are trying to emphasize. It's also smart because it should probably relate not to situations or case studies who are being imagined or intellectually, very clear that value of standards is there, but there are real-time messy situations in which all of us are, and they are having to deal with. They don't come in a systematic way, they come in a very real-time way. And within our group, I just want to say that South African colleagues who are not online because Bonnie, but she will be following it somehow, she told us standards and business is my interest. In St. Lucia, we know standards and parliament and the Vision 2020. In Botswana, standards and 2016 vision with all the rest of it. In Swaziland, I don't know what you say, Lomkosi, but you are all over the place in national smart partnership dialogues from the Tikundlas and everywhere. In Namibia, standards and banking. In Zimbabwe, they interface with technology policy and nano and ZIM assets. In Malaysia, consumers, quite a lot, standards and consumers. In BSI, we are very much is BS standards and technology. Innovation. So that's why, again, this webinar is smart. And now, of course, we had this smart webinar because we refer to the interaction that through Smart Partnership International Dialogues, you all get to interact with leaders and of all kinds, both last year and since 2009 in Uganda. And the challenges of these interactions that we're trying to say should be used to increase or to demonstrate in real-time situations the value of standards, economic and social and so on, is even more challenging because of the increased interconnectivity in each national economic and socio-economic system, which in itself is becoming a national, increasingly internationalized, and thus internationally integrated. So you can't help kind of avoiding to hide, yeah? So the value of standard that is for Switzerland or UK or US is probably in the same context as one can discuss about the value of standards in Swaziland. This is for me as an outsider to see the way you're dealing with. So this objective of this webinar, smart webinar, to try to identify some of these challenges. And the other one is when a dialogue is not a smart partnership dialogue, can we emphasize when a dialogue with small d, which is being used as a word, as a concept, stakeholders and all that, by everybody, when a dialogue is not a dialogue. Now we say all these things have been done before, repetitive and so on, and David would correct me, but Mark Twain sometime said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So probably whatever we talk today, it will rhyme with what everybody talked about value of standards at any point of time where we will talk in the future. So here we are, and now Daniele, that's my bit. Daniele will come in with value of standards. He's 20 minutes or so, kind of presentation. Now, on the screen you've seen that I brought in to remind you the approach that Smart Partnership Movement and yourself are engaged in, and which couldn't be more relevant as a framework for the today discussion. So I won't go through them because the main point of attention is what Daniele will stimulate us with, and then the main interaction is from yourself, about an hour. So here we are. Please, Daniele.
Thank you very much, Michaela. We can start now. So we have more participants. I hope a few more maybe will join during the remaining minutes. And this presentation is a bit of a summary on the value of standards, and try to provide a general overview of the topic with hopefully some practical suggestions and elements to stimulate the discussion and action by the participant. So the first thing is we talk a second about what is a standard. We look at how standards are seen in economic theory very quickly. What are in general terms the benefits of standards, how they are considered for different type of stakeholders and use. We'll see the issue of how is it possible to measure the value of standards, and then we'll enter into some details about case studies and key findings from case studies and materials that are available to present all these type of things. The first is a curiosity. I don't know that if many of you know what, from where the name standard comes. And actually, this is very clear, and especially if you use French or other European languages where standard, you still have the word standard, and in the origin the standard is a banner, is a sort of a flag used as a rally point, especially in battle. And in some languages the name is still distinguished, and you can understand why evocatively standards can be applied to some of the things that we are dealing with. But
did you say German is hot?
Yes, yes. But let's say, in the way that in our world we consider standard, and there are three main aspects that characterize the nature of the standards that we are dealing with. So I provide here three definitions. One is from the USA, is the National Standards Policy Advisory Committee. You can see that this is very much focused on the content, on the technical content of standards. Then you have the ISO IEC definition, where you can see that here, in a very elegant way, are combined issues of what is the technical content, the rules, guidelines, characteristics for activities, their results, etc., but the fact that you need to have a recognized body, that is the authority that issues the standards, and the process through which the standards is established, which is by consensus. And finally, I just presented the definition that is used in the WTO TBT agreement. This is very important because it has a lot of influence and binding connections with the trade and other issues, where you see that in an explicit way they state that standards is something, and is very much taken from the ISO definition, but with which compliance is not mandatory. And I would consider, and I would suggest to focus the attention on this one. Forget for a moment the fact that here in the WTO TBT is restricted to product, because is the scope of the TBT is restricted to product. But of course you can understand that this notion can be seen generally. And the main issue, because I would like to underline this, because very often, particularly with public authorities or certain stakeholder groups, this is a source of a lot of confusion, is that it's very useful to take a clear-cut distinction and consider that standards, type of standards we're talking with, are voluntary, and as opposed to technical regulations that are parts of the law and are mandatory. This is very important from the point of view of the understanding of the subject matter. Of course, there is an interactions, there is between standards and regulations, and very often standards can be referenced or taken up in regulation, but this is one of the key messages to bear in mind, the key difference between the standards and regulations that are mandatory. This is very often confusing because some bodies, other organizations, use the term standards in a different way. That's why I spent some time to present these things and possibly to provide some elements to clearly define what is the situation, even in relations to other organizations that use standards in different forms. So that, for example, if you take the Financial Stability Board, when they talk about standard, they definitely intend forms of public policy of mandatory nature, and so on. But that is an important, I think, element to bear in mind. And so you have that taking into account the three levels, the technical content, the process through which the standards are developed, and the body that issues them, and the legal status. You can see and classify and see very different types of standards, etc. And it is not the purpose of today's presentation. Just remind what is the role of ISO, as it is in our present mission statement, where you see that all the principles and the feature regarding the nature of standards and the way that they are developed are presented here. So you mention of consensus, and particularly two levels of consensus among stakeholders and across countries, and with the applications of principles, and so on and so forth. You see that in the slide. It is not needed to go further with this one. Now, the immediate step forward is talking about standards in economics. Just here you can find some definitions of some terms used in economics, but the key point is that economists recognize that standards are seen as contributing to public welfare primarily in three ways. This was summarized very well in the WTO trade report 2005, which was fully dedicated to the theme of standards and trade. So, and it is the work of a plurality of economists. The idea is that standards are instruments that improve economic efficiency. They help to address the so-called market failures, or at least to limiting their undesirable outcome. So situations where only the market mechanisms don't provide positive or the most desirable outcome for society, and for promoting trade. So that is just the three main axes where in economics theory is seen the role of standards. So for example, if you talk about economic efficiency, it's clear standards have a key role, and this is all the history of development of standards in supporting economy of scale and to help to establish and exploit network effect. These are particularly important today in relations to the complexity of supply chains on a global level, and it is a clear indication of how standards help in introducing and taking advantage of this mechanism. They help to address market failures, particularly in two areas where we can say that a certain type of standards help to reduce the information asymmetries that typically exist between producers of goods and users of goods, because they provide clear specifications and mechanism to share information and reduce the gap in that sense, and also to contrast the negative externalities, which are typical things like the environmental impact, where it is not necessarily included into the mechanism of the market mechanism between the two parties, the impact of the effect that some of the exchange may have as an impact on other parties. And finally, they're seeing to a strong contribution to promote trade, particularly at the international level, because they facilitate access to markets through the harmonization of requirements and conformity assessment practices. They help to reduce the transaction costs between companies, buyers and sellers and traders, and facilitate enormously the establishment and operation of supply chain networks. And here is presented a map of what, in relation to this type of role of the economy and what type of standards in terms of categories are involved. So, for example, if you look at the economies of scale and the exploiting of network externalities, you see that variety reduction standards and compatibility interface standards are critical. If you talk about reducing information asymmetries or contrasting negative externalities, information measurement standards and minimum quality and safety standards are critical to provide this type of support. So, in this sense, we can see that standards that have as you see, a solid role in economic theory, they are also very clearly seen as giving benefit to different categories of stakeholders. Here we just mentioned companies, so private business, companies, consumers, public authorities, and let's say developing countries in general. And very quickly we can see that for companies, standards have a significant contribution in terms of cost reduction, particularly helping to rationalize processes and to improve productivity. They also have a contribution to increase market opportunities, because very often standards help to access broader target markets and help the development of markets. And they also can be seen as tools that may, in some cases, support competitive advantage and provide improved risk management. For consumers, standards provide a lot of benefits, as listed here. Typically, they improve choice, they help to lower cost, they help to have the possibility to get products with objective improved quality and reliability, and another set of aspects including safer, healthier, and more environmentally sound products and services. For public authorities, the key elements are the possibility of supporting a more efficient development of promotion of measures of public utility, because of the mechanism of the way that standards are developed and used, to achieve a higher efficiency in getting targets, again, because using standards can be particularly efficient as a mechanism to achieve certain targets, for example, in relation to safety or security of products and services, and also they can give a significant contribution to economic development and support of the consumer interests. And for developing countries, finally, standards are an enormous source of affordable and up-to-date technical information. This is certainly something that is extremely important, as well as there are other aspects. And I would also say that adapting products for exports and the relations to the ability to access export markets is another set of very important factors. So we see that standards have a role in economic theory. We see that standards have presumed to have a value, but how can we measure that? Is it possible to do that? And yes, the answer is yes, and a number of approaches have been taken, I would say, in the last 10-15 years to do that. And typically we can distinguish between macroeconomic approaches, where studies that have tried to evaluate the impact of standards on economies, trying to answer questions like, is there an impact on growth, productivity, trade balances? And then we'll see in a moment the impact and studies dealing with microeconomic impact. So, in the macroeconomic scene, I would say that a milestone study was published by Germany in the year 2000, the economic benefits of standardization. It was followed by other studies, for example, one published by the DTI UK and BSI in 2005, and then from other countries that tried to analyze the economic impact of standards on national economies. Mm-hmm. And I don't get into the details, but if you're interested, you can see that. And particularly the approach followed by Professor Knut Blindt and his partner has been using advanced econometric models to study to identify statistical evidence on the impact of standards, taking global national variables of economic output and development and increase of the stock of national standards. So, to make a long story short, they came to the conclusion that standards produced an average contribution to the growth of the German GDP in the decades that they considered in the order of 1%, which represent for the 5-year period 2002-2006 an amount, a monetary value of nearly 17 billion euros for the German economy. Right. The microeconomic approach tries to answer, and many of the other studies mentioned above for the macroeconomic part have come to similar results, looking sometimes at different perspective. All of them can be found in the ISO repository of studies. I will spend a few words at the end of this presentation on that. If we're talking about the microeconomic impact, so what is that? Is the impact that standards, what are the benefits that they bring to individual organizations? And this is where we have the ISO methodology, an approach that we have developed. Actually, we started in 2008, and we had a significant project which was followed by a number of case studies developed applying the ISO methodology. And the aim of this is to identify what is the value for an organization in using standards and to allow the comparison of studies. So the ISO methodology, as we say, has the objective of quantifying the contribution that standards bring to the creation of economic value, typically for a company, and then many other things. So the approach, the definitions is that we look in this perspective at the company, at the organization, and here you have many elements. So what this has led to, in concrete terms, to the development of a large collection of case studies. And we have developed in the past few years over 30 company case studies in 21 countries, and others are going on. And the sector case study has been developed for the global automotive sectors, and others are ongoing at the national level. So you can see here that we have the picture, so 21 completed studies applying the green countries. Then you have the dark green countries as where, well, no, that's one pending study. The blue one are those that are under development, and you see also the violet for those countries that have developed national studies on the impact at the macroeconomic level. So you can see that a lot of countries have participated in this exercise, and others are joining, which is interesting and provides a very useful source of materials for everybody. The companies that have been analyzed belong to very different sectors and have different sizes, from very small companies, well, relatively small companies of a revenue of about $5 million to companies with more than $2 billion of annual revenue. The key findings of these studies is that we have seen the standards contribute in three major ways. The first one, almost invariably, standards help to streamline operations by reducing the time needed to perform specific activities, by decreasing waste, by reducing procurement costs, and increasing productivity. And what we have found in the studies that typically the contribution that standards bring to the gross profit of companies can be evaluated between less than 1% and 5% of the annual sales revenues, which is a quite sizable contribution. The second element is that in some cases, for some case studies, we've found very good evidence that standards have been used as a basis for innovating business processes and allowing companies to expand their supplier network or to introduce new types of products and services. And finally, in other case studies, in some of them, we have clear evidence of the way standards facilitate access to or create new market. And in some cases, they provide the basis for new products or support the market uptake and even the creation of new market. We have exceptional cases. We'll see one at the end where the impact of standard far exceeded the figures mentioned before, when they have a really strategic role of a company, and we'll see in a moment a practical example of this case. It's a bit exceptional, where I would say that the general case is the most typical impact on streamlining operation, where you can identify and quantify the benefit and the access to markets that we mentioned here. We also extended, that's an important, we started last year to extend the analysis to evaluate the social and environmental benefits of standards with the contribution that they give. Typically, this is related with improving the health and safety of people and the protection of the environment, and for public authorities, the efficiency in achieving targets. And we have developed the first set of case studies that cover that, including a certain number of case studies in China and case studies in Brazil with one of the leading forestry companies to evaluate the benefits that standards bring in relation to environmental and social benefits. Okay. To conclude, this is all of these things that I have sketched very quickly in this presentation are available, a lot of materials on the ISO website. You can find the ISO resources, so we see in the page of benefits of international standards, there is a full set of ISO materials where all the case studies are presented, the methodology is there, toolbox and tools that help to do these things, and a set of video clips that presents the results of some of these case studies. And you have a folder with the fact sheets that for each of the case studies published between 2010 and 2012, you have just one page describing the essential findings for the company, the organization that has been identified, and these are some of the other things. To conclude, I would just like to show you one of the video clips.
Thousands of miners go missing or lose their lives in accidents that could have been avoided. What if we could find these people or warn them of dangers before they arrive? Nanotron Technologies has a system used in mines to help improve safety, and standardization has played a large role in the company's success.
Hello, I'm Jens Albers, CEO of Nanotron Technologies, a small innovative company based in Berlin, Germany. We have created a local positioning system that can work both indoors and outdoors. Everyone knows about GPS, but inside a building, a tunnel or a mine, GPS can't work. Our system of anchors and tags, which talk to each other using wireless technology, can help find things, and these can be animals, objects, or people. There are many examples of how this can be used. In mines, we can give every miner a tag, as well as a tag for the mining machinery. This allows us to warn the machinery operator if there are people wearing a tag in close range, avoiding often fatal accidents. So just to show you how it works, we have a test system in our office. Here I have a tag that can communicate with the anchors which are around the office. So now on the monitor you can see that I'm here in the meeting room. I will now leave with the tag and move to the lab. You can see me moving on the screen.
Nanotron Technologies is a small company with 22 employees, but it has been very active in the development of the ISO IEC standard 24730 Part 5, which forms the basis of its system.
Standards are very important to our company, in particular ISO IEC 24730. This standard contains the rules for real-time location systems. We follow these to make sure our technology works well and does not interfere with other wireless systems. It also means our technology is compatible with other interfaces. Building on a standard like this means that we expand the market for our technology. Complying to a standard also reassures our customers, as they can see that it's an established technology. We were very active in developing ISO IEC 24730-5, and I advise any innovative company to get involved in the standardization process. We knew that if we didn't drive this standard, somebody else would, and potentially in another direction. Standards are part of our IP strategy. Obviously, this is a cost, but getting involved during the process is a great way of meeting potential customers and suppliers and validates our IP.
In fact, Nanotron has quantified the benefits of standards by using the ISO methodology. This study found that the gross profit generated by standards was around 33% of Nanotron's sales. This is an especially high result due to the central role standards play in the company.
My advice to someone new to standardization, whatever industry you're in, check out the standards that already exist. They may well contain some guidelines or processes that you can follow to make your life easier. If something already exists, build on it don't waste time creating it again. And if something doesn't exist, then get involved in its development. This allows you to be at the center of the action and making decisions that shape your future market.
Fine, that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
Is that all right?
with that,
Fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, I would like just kind of to bring in Alan to try to connect again smart partnership, smart dialogue with attracting users with the background that Daniele brought in. I mean, there should be a lot of confidence on how one could attract or explain to the users, whoever they are, that they are business, academia, or public sector. Alan?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes?
yes,
Okay, fine. Well, first I would like to congratulate Daniele and his team in Geneva for having amplified so much and materialized what we had started together in 2008. So congratulations. Second, I would like to, my comment will be mainly to sort of bridge the values of standards and the values of the Smart Partnership Movement. And I have got involved precisely because I consider that these values converge. Indeed, at two levels. The first is that standards, as has been demonstrated, are tools for economic and social transformation of countries. And economic and social transformation is precisely what we are supporting with the Smart Partnership Movement. And this can only happen if it is done from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. So getting heads of state and government, public authorities, CEOs, aware of the value of standards to contribute to economic and social transformation is certainly the first important point that brings us together with the standards community. And the second value that we share is precisely in the process to develop standards. As Daniele has explained, standards result from an iterative, open process which involves all stakeholders, and therefore we find the concept of dialogue, and within the standards technical committees, clearly there is dialogue, and there is a positive dialogue that leads to consensus. Also, the concept of networks that we cherish in the Smart Partnership Movement. So I think that Daniele's presentation has really illustrated how we in the Smart Partnership Movement can take advantage of the economic and social benefits of standards to support economic and social transformation of countries. And the second is that we need to, through our networks in the Smart Partnership Movement, bring in more contributors to the table of standardization. And I believe that many of those who are attending the meeting this afternoon are precisely those at the level of national standards bodies who are bridging the Smart Partnership Movement and the contribution of standards. So this is my comment.
Alan, when do you think a dialogue with small d is not a smart partnership, is not a dialogue in the context of smart partnership interaction of NSBs? When, think a bit about it, because you see the word dialogue and networks are used.
Well, I think from what I hear in developing countries, one difficulty that NSBs have is to bring experts and representatives from the various economic and social partners to the table of standardization. And this is, maybe they will confirm now, but I have heard this very often, is when you constitute a standards committee in a developing country, you have difficulty to bring people to the table. And I believe that the Smart Partnership Movement, because it reaches out to the top in the country, to the heads of state, government, and so on, and also to the various economic and social partners, that can be a synergy between the Smart Partnership Movement and bringing people to the table of standardization through the national standard bodies, and therefore enhancing the contribution of developing countries to the content of standards. So this is where I see the virtue of the dialogue that we promote in the Smart Partnership Movement and the orderly, organized, if you may say, standards development process, for which the NSBs in developing countries, that maybe they can comment on this, very often have difficulty to bring people to the table, from industry, from public authorities, to bring them to the table to contribute to the content of standards.
But just because I have and we have in the movement an issue with this kind of segregation of developing. We have David here and from BSI as one of the group. So I think David has, and Scott, they've got same problems of a different magnitude, different context, same problems. Like the so the idea of developed matters in a different context, but from the point of view of attracting users, there are challenges similar nature. David, and then we'll get everybody else. David.
Yeah, I think the difference is not about the nature of the problems, it's about the scale of the problems and probably the way that we solve them.
You have the same problems.
We have the very similar problems. And I'm not sure whether you were suggesting the UK was a developing country or a developed country.
Those don't exist.
But there's 3 points I just want to pick up on that have come out of the Daniele's excellent presentation and the input from Alan there. And it's really about the fundamental nature of standards, the fundamental nature of which actually creates the value. And one of them Alan just mentioned there is about the accessibility of our systems. Wherever I go in the world, people say, you know, in this country, whichever country I'm in, they say, in this country it's all about small and micro and medium-sized enterprises. That's different in my country, it's all about small enterprises. It's the same everywhere in the world. The challenge for all of us are to get to the innovative small companies and to get them involved in the standardization process. And it's why that particular case study from Nanotron is so interesting, because they're a small country that is a company that's growing, and it's absolutely essential that our processes are open and accessible. And when I'm in Africa, they talk about the way they use mobile internet in ways that, frankly, in Europe we don't see it being used. That gives a perfect opportunity for national standards bodies across Africa to use mobile technology to get all of the hard-to-reach stakeholders round the virtual table to get them to contribute fully. Just 2 other things I'd like to say. One is about the nature of the discussion that we have around standards and innovation. For years we've heard this truism that standards should not get involved in the development of new industries too early, because what we do is stifle innovation. And we repeat that as a mantra, and consequently what happens is we don't talk to innovators, we don't talk to the research community, we don't talk to the scientific community, because we feel somehow our presence is inhibiting them. But actually when you talk to researchers, you find that the problems they have are very open to being solved by standards. They need a common lexicon, they need a vocabulary they can use, they need to express the needs of the market through their work, they need to set expectations, and standards are a perfect vehicle for that. So I would urge everybody to reach out in whatever country with the research community and with science as well. And finally, the other point, that we really must focus on some of the major themes that affect our economies, because for years we've focused on small technical problems, and we've produced small technical solutions, and they've built this excellent system that we have today. But we know for the future we really must address the big issues. We're working really hard in ISO and nationally on things like smart cities, connecting up so many different parts of national infrastructures through standards. But standards in the health sector, standards for financial services, big topics, the big drivers of our economies, are very often untouched by our standards, and we absolutely must reach out to those organisations. That's all I'll say.
Hey, Mihaela, thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a very good presentation. It is very punchy, and I also like the comments made by Alan. I'm very pleased what we have achieved today, and I look forward to what we're going to have towards the later part of this year. But just a little, maybe as a kickstart based on Malaysia's experience, I feel that in order to attract the politicians, for example, and to get the dialogue moving and to get immediate attention, I believe that standards, even though it is voluntary in nature, but if it's got to be starting with the regulators, because we're talking about, for example, communications and electricity, those are the key things which I noticed will attract the regulators. And then rather than they have got their own rules, it would be good that if we are able to influence them to be saying that there are standards that they can use and to be considering them to be put into the whatever regulations that they are planning to have, especially in the area of electricity, for example, or food. That is very dear to their heart. So I think this could be a very small and immediate step that we can consider to propose in terms of getting the benefits of standards to the economy through making it mandatory for a start, even though it is, I know, voluntary. Mm-hmm. So that's my initial comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Other comments?
Anybody
Other people
else?
would like to say, to comment or ask a question or contribution for the discussion?
Lomkosi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation. I'd like to have that presentation. Is it on the ISO website?
No, you're going to have it,
Sure,
but what
sure.
are you going to do with it, Lomkosi? That's the point.
Yeah, I saw this presentation some years ago when I started working for the NSB, and it's just been reminded to me, and it's a very good presentation that I need to start using again for some stakeholders. So thank you very much, Daniele, for reminding us of this presentation. And then secondly, I saw the point about standards being a source of information for developing countries. There were various benefits for developing countries. I wrote it somewhere. Yeah, and I'm also from a developing country myself. I'm seeing another opportunity that standards can benefit in non-developing countries or developed countries. In terms of developing countries encapsulating some indigenous knowledge in their standards so that the rest of the world can know about it, even the developed countries. So I'm seeing there's a slow movement. It was a technology transfer issue from a developed country to developing countries. Now I'm seeing the movement going backwards in terms of developing countries making known or spreading some indigenous knowledge and making it, proposing it as international standards so that there is knowledge. It's a two-way corridor of information. And then thirdly, I'd like to commend Alan Dryden for his comments, which are so spot on. And I'm going to use some of these sentences in my speeches here in Swaziland. Perhaps just to say to Alan, I like the way you equate the Smart Partnership Movement and the standards development process. There is some congruence between those two processes. And then you are saying developing countries have difficulty in bringing people to the table in the process of standards writing, and I say that is true. So perhaps in a developing country, I just got a thought at that moment as you were speaking, that perhaps in developing countries we can also use the smart partnership kind of approach, the HOTA kind of approach in getting people to talk about standards and to bring information that we can then put in standards. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Actually, still in Swaziland, because the idea was that a business person, a user, or any other type, we have one online, he will come back. So the idea was that we have people who are potential or current users of standards, who are listening both to yourself and to what has been said. Yeah, because if we are saying that we are going to use what we had in a generic way, and we don't have people who are already likely users. So I hear St. Lucia, Kabi, you have some people with you. Do you want to come in? St. Lucia?
Yes,
Dr. Walcott, yeah.
And I appreciate the discussion so far this morning because here in St. Lucia, we have worked for a number of years looking at the development of standards. And the difficulty that we have experienced is that having gone through the process and all the effort, there's difficulty or challenges in relation to the usage of these standards. And I think it's important for the various bureaus of standards now to look at exactly what we're speaking about this morning, to integrate standards in economic development and make that strategic link to speak to our different problems that we face as individual countries and see how standards really and truly is going to provide solutions and enhance economic development. And I think moving forward, this is where we are able to bring more persons to the table if we really focus standardization and the value of standardization as it pertains to economic development. And that is the focus here, especially as we're facing an economic crisis here in the Caribbean.
That's it.
We really have to see how standards and quality is going to assist in our coming out of our economic crisis and providing solutions to economic development. So we look forward, and I think the smart partnership approach really is going to be the approach that is going to provide us with results. We really have to do this nationally, using that approach regionally and internationally. And I really want us to focus on economic development, whether it's nationally or regionally.
Yeah.
That's my contribution.
But Mkabi, do you have any colleagues with you, or? Hello?
At the moment,
yeah.
Yes, at the moment, we have with us primarily members of staff of the Bureau, and the reason that areas for us, tourism and agriculture, and yes, we are really moving ahead in doing some consultation with our public sector to look at the how public sector basically responds to the private sector.
Okay, so.
Just a note. If you have a chance, please bring my best wishes to the CEO of Baron Foods. We had a great time together in St. Lucia doing the study a couple of years ago.
I thought you also say to the Parliament, because you addressed them. You see, he addressed the Parliament, you took him there, so all your parliamentarians should know about standards.
Well,
already we planted the seeds. We planted the seeds. Okay.
Yes, he did do that, and we're grateful for it. But we're hoping to have something similar with the Parliament, with our permanent secretaries across the public service, and other heads of various public sector institutions.
And you have this.
We will be coming back to Daniel and the Smart Partnership for some support there.
But I suppose the Vision 2020 gives you quite enough framework, actually, to do whatever you want. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. A colleague of mine wants to make a comment. Zamala from our Standard Development Department.
Please, come in.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Daniel, for your presentation. Zamala Hayes from Finishable Standards. Adding to what Dr. Walcott said, some of our main challenges is, again, I think Malaysia brought that up, where standards are not mandatory. We have a lot of problems with compliance. So we have to always reinforce, especially with our parliaments, continue to re-engage them again and again to try and get it across to them so they can start incorporating standards in the various ministries, and not just them developing their own standards, but using the Bureau standards and, of course, the access we have to international and other regional standards to get those documents, those best requirements within the public sector and then by extension the private sector. So for us, our challenge is still really transcending from voluntary standards to mandatory standards. Although we know we try not to advocate for mandatory standards, but towards technical regulations, but more use of the standards as regulations in St. Lucia.
Right.
And Daniel, of course, you'd remember those were some of the things that we were trying to get across to the parliamentarians when we did some of those presentations in 2012, I think.
Yes, thank you very much, Tamala. I remember very well. And you must tell me one day if you won any rally of St. Lucia with your car, but just no. One note.
Still no evidence, but I've won many races.
Okay, I've got many races, Shiva. No, just one note that may be of interest. Actually, this point. Of the relation between regulation and technical standards, engagement of the private sector, and it was well covered in the thesis of one of my students at the masters at the University of Geneva from BSN, from Indonesia. I think it could be a good idea to circulate, because she did this thesis on focused on institutional strengthening of BSN and standardization in Indonesia, and came out with quite a number of interesting points in relation precisely to the issues that you are highlighting. And I think it could be a good idea to circulate that, and also to have the opportunity to share some. It would be a long story to describe, I cannot, but there were two critical points there. One is the complexity and some of the inefficiency of the institutional setting currently in place in Indonesia for standardization, with overlaps between responsibility in different government interests, etc., and the lack of engagement of the public, of the private sector, with some suggestion on how to, I would say, get out from this impasse. Thank you very much for your comment.
Well, I suppose Diane, thank you very much in St. Lucia. You stay online. Diane in another in Caribbean, in Antigua, and her colleagues, Craig and Julie. Diane, you're online. Hello, Diane in Antigua.
Julia.
And Julia.
Hello.
Yeah, is that Julie or Diane?
This is Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Okay, Julie, do you want to come in, and then probably Diane will also follow you. Thank you for joining us. Yeah?
I'm sorry I joined late, so I missed quite a bit, but I think that this webinar is quite a good initiative, and I'm pleased to know that standards are really getting the attention they deserve. I think for too long, persons did not appreciate the role and the importance of standard in society, no matter what they are, whether it's developing, developed, or what have you. In terms of moving forward with our businesses, we really must have the very best in whatever we present in goods and services for our clients. And I think that is where the role of standard is important. And webinars such as these, I think, help to spread the word around. We learn from experiences of others. We bring our challenges and issues to the fore, and have a discussion. So I think these are very good initiatives.
Now, Julie, you have a new government, new prime minister, new ministers. So how are you going to help Diane to try to explain to them? the value of
standards. I don't
standards.
work directly with the Bureau of Standards.
No.
But I do know that she had a meeting with the new minister, Mr. Chet Green. She had a meeting with him, and that went very well. And I think that we can expect his full support with the programs going forward. Diane says she's having some problems with her mic. So I'm
she'll
just
come in. Fine.
Of her.
Okay.
So I kind of collaborate with the Bureau in their programs, but I don't work directly there.
Okay.
And I know that they've had that meeting already.
No, but you know, Julie, it's a new opportunity now. New government, right at the beginning. They don't know anything about standards. You can make it a great opportunity, as you know. So here you are. But David wants to say something. David
Well,
Welch.
just on that, the new Prime Minister of Antigua should certainly be interested in standards because his cousin works in London for BSI. So if you need any connection, we can try through our other routes.
That's a network.
But you know, one of the key things that governments are looking for to get out of the economic crisis that we've been in is to improve exports and improve trade. And possibly Russell from CrossQ might have a view on this.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that we really must focus on trade and the value of standards to trade, particularly for a region like CARICOM, where you can work together to harmonise your standards and really boost your trade paths. Maybe CrossQ has a view on that.
Yeah. Russell, are you online? Russell? Yeah, Russell, you want to come in from...
Yes, well, I would say that,
please.
Okay. Well, I would say that presentation was very useful. And as like other persons have said before, I will be borrowing a few slides and a few comments from Daniele from this presentation. And what I would say in the region where we are is in terms of not only standards, but developing a regional quality infrastructure is just moving past the basic and looking to attain international recognition. So in terms of this presentation and the use of standards, what I have found in the region is that companies who already export or who already have developed certain capabilities already understand the need and the use of standards. And for that, in terms of quality infrastructure, and I've gone ahead without probably the national standards bodies or the regional bodies like CrossQ in developing their infrastructure, their quality infrastructure. What we need to do now is build an awareness regionally, and that's what one of the things that at CrossQ we're looking at, building an awareness in terms of the need for standards, the need for quality, especially with respect to consumers, starting from the bottom coming up, whereby they would influence the private sector to start to embrace quality infrastructure. One of the other things we're doing from the top coming down is trying to ask the private sector not to look at in using standardization or using standards as an additional cost, but look at it as in terms of a capital investment, just similar to a piece of equipment. And that's one of the things we try to preach. And of course, with this presentation by Daniele, I would add some of his comments, and especially some of his numbers, some of the numbers he crunched there to some of our presentations, because those persons like to see figures and the way how business can improve in terms of implementing standards. But I think at the moment in this region, especially one of the things we really need to focus on is awareness and building that awareness of the need of standardization.
You know, Russell, if I may come in,
sure.
Diane is not on, but one of the best way of beyond even awareness is probably start with a few specific real situations, as different as they can, in each and every island, which for about 2 years or 3 years, you just hammer at them, not awareness, just go on until with all the problems that and the messiness that brings in. We had in the Caribbean, in about 15 islands, for about 3 years, quality management situations from Guyana to Jamaica. And this is something that you could do. There was no CrossQ at that time. So in other words, deal with specific problems in each and every island. the CPTM and the Smart Partnership would very much be interested to do that again, to back you up. Yeah? So we need to discuss about that, because it's a demonstrable thing. I mean, there are all these tools and kind of theoretical comfort that you can have. But actually, unless you have some specific situation, not case studies, that you go from the beginning until the end with it, you won't be able to demonstrate. So, but we'll talk about that probably beyond.
We are actually looking at that. And also we have a project called Caladina, which is basically Spanish for value and chain.
Okay.
And basically what we're looking at is applying quality infrastructure to the entire value chain.
So that is, I think it will be an interesting thing, and from the Institute, I think it will be very important to support the development and the completion of this case study, which is on the meat sector, that on a company that participates in that sector, which I know is very important for Namibia. So also in terms of in the agri-food sector would be quite, I think, useful and interesting also for other countries. So really, how to say, encourage to continue and complete this study, because that would be useful to provide concrete information and shed light on a number of factors.
Okay, and don't forget actually the request from the central bank governor himself, Shimi,
Absolutely, yes,
to maintain the interaction in Katatura, because for informal settlement, I mean, it's very useful. Again, take an opportunity. Elections are coming, so standards could be. What about that in the manifesto? What about that? You can, but you have ammunitions from the Smart Partnership interactions. Deputy Prime Minister, the governor, they all know about it, President. So we're not talking at that level only. We're talking at a kind of bread and butter level, but they are also aware of it. They wouldn't kind of switch off thinking it's technical. Yeah. Anyway, I think
that the Smart Partnership Movement in Namibia is very well known. Maybe you remember, Shimea will remember, it was even held here a few years back. So the government of Namibia is very aware of the functions of the Smart Partnership Movement.
Okay.
And the government is also very much involved in ISO and IEC work at national level.
Fine.
So I mean, there is really nothing much one can say about that, except that yes, the public sector is very much involved. I think we have more challenges
with private sector
in SMEs to participate so that they work.
That's a very important point.
That are usually multinational corporations.
Okay.
They tend to use their own standards. I don't want to mention names, but for instance, people in the uranium mining sector, which is quite a thriving industry here in Namibia,
Fine.
most of them come from like the Rio Tinto group of companies.
Yeah.
And they tend to have their own standards. So frankly, they don't see the economic value for them or the economic benefit for them to participate in development of standards at national level.
Fine. Point taken. Maybe within Smart Partnership rather than in ISO context, we can pick up that point in a different mode. Fine. Okay. So thank you. Now, I suppose we are almost kind of, according to our timing, or at the end of it, and unless there is anyone else who is online, I would like to ask Alan and then Daniele to, if you have any, David, points, but Alan, please, and then Daniele. Alan, are you online?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Can you see me?
Academic development and connection between standards and academia. We have done a lot of work recently in the past few years, and in cooperation with many members, and we will have the opportunity to do more, and perhaps in the future we may have another webinar specifically dedicated, even in this context, in partnership with the CPTM, to talk about that. Just one thing I wanted to note is that on this specific point is that a new ISO document, an ISO guide, which is called the Teaching Standards, and is a description of good practices and guidance on how to develop cooperation between national standards bodies and universities, will be delivered at the ISO General Assembly. It's just in the final phase of editing, and is going to be published soon. And it incorporates the results of 3 regional workshops that we have organized on the topic in the past 2 years. That was a specific point. Thank you, Anna, for raising. It's certainly an area which is very important and very much in our radar screen. And for the rest, my impression, I think, I hope that this information provided today would, although maybe some of you were already aware of some of the points, but in general terms, I hope it was useful to revisit some of these topics, and also maybe to get additional information, and certainly the opportunity to discuss about these topics, which I'm absolutely convinced needs to continue. And the idea with Michaela was to use this context of the Smart Partnership Network as an additional channel and opportunity to address a number of issues that are relevant from the point of view of ISO and standardization. And I'm sure, as we have seen through what Michaela said and Alan has underlined, but we see a good connection between what we do and what the Smart Partnership Movement is doing. So thank you very much for my part. It was a pleasure to join this discussion, and I give the floor to Michaela for concluding.
No, I mean, I only have 3 points again. Just to make sure that I follow Daniele, but particularly Alan. We always try to refer to Alan as keeping time and being systematic, particularly economic. But the value of smart partnership approach, which probably we are still referring to this network. If for instance, Lomkosi was here, Lomkosi, you know, because you articulate so well in front of the entire nation when you are a smart partnership dialogue, and you are doing it so well because you are not on your own. If one of these links into a network is not there, you are not linked with, you are unable to actually articulate the value of standards for that particular user. So I suggest, as part of my 1 and 2 remarks I want to make at the end on behalf of all of us, is that we should have value of smart partnership for enhancing or making happening this use of standards. Because the value of standards is quite clear, but it has to be repeated in many ways and as systematically as possible, with case studies, and international standards organization is the main point of reference for anybody, kind of WTO, national context, regional context. But the value of smart partnership in that context has to be understood in an operative way. And I understand that National Bureau of Standards, they do not have in their terms of reference, and therefore resources and people who are being recognized as dealing with the value of smart partnership in the context of value of standards. So that's probably something that we may need to deal with. And lastly, is I wanted to thank very much to International Standards Organization on behalf of all of us, Secretary General Rob Steele, in particular Daniele and all the team from Geneva. Like to thank to Alan who is kind of a smart partner since he was Secretary General of ISO. We wouldn't have been here without that connection. Fadila, who had the first kind of get-together of what became today the informal quality inclusion from Caribbean up to Malaysia, Singapore, etc. And on behalf of my colleague, dialogue convener from South Africa, whom I understood since yesterday, again, that is the Director General Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Lubisi, in President's Office, that we wish you to be part of and have a specific program in mind for the dialogue in South Africa, which will be in October after the ISO conference, where in Brazil, where I hope we can maintain a brief to be distributed about the value of smart partnership and value of standards through yourself, who will be present in Brazil. They will be over by then, by the end of September, over the problem with the football, a little bit. So hopefully you will come after that into the South African context, and we'll move on. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to my team here.